Welcome to Living Free in Tennessee, where we talk about building the life you choose on your terms. Today is Monday, August 14th, 2023. This is episode 780 of Living Free in Tennessee. And it's a Monday show, but it's sort of a big thank you show, a big celebration show, because we actually passed this milestone a little while ago, but there was so much going on with travel and other things. I didn't want to half-ass it. So we're celebrating 1 million downloads today, and we're starting a 4-week giveaway thing of 1 million Satoshis. So we're going to start a giveaway where y'all help me figure out which episodes you like best, and we share those. And then we will also go through and celebrate some of those episodes. I might redo a couple of them. And then after that, we give away Satoshis. I've already put them aside because you never know what's going to happen with Satoshis. So I've got them set in their own private location, and whoever wins, wins. We'll talk about how to do that later in today's show. We're also going to do our usual segments of a Monday show, which is Tales from the Prepper Pantry, the shopping report, the squash episode. Janet's like, squash episode. I talk about the squash episode today a little bit. We're going to talk about our live stream schedule and all of that stuff. So hang out. And those of you in the live stream today, thanks for joining. If you want to get my attention, type question in all caps, and then your question, I'll start and try to work it into the show. I mean, assuming that it, fits the show. Okay, well, let's go to our featured event of today's show, and it's the Kentucky Sustainable Living Expo, which is in Kentucky, October 28th and 29th. And I've thrown the links in the show notes, but go to KentuckySustainableLiving.com if you're just hearing this on the audio notes. Don't pull your car over and write it down, though, because you can go to episode 780 and hit that link right away. Looks like it's going to be a really fun time. It's a 2-day event with some add-on butchering classes and other cool stuff. And it's just a great way to meet other people who are into homesteading and preparedness and freedom and all the things we talk about here at Living Free in Tennessee. It's part of the Three Sisters, the Great American Prepping Tour that starts in Kansas, then goes to Self-Reliance Festival in Tennessee, and ends at the Kentucky Sustainable Living Festival. I know some of you are going to all three this year. We're kind of cooking up a little prize you might get if you can prove you've been at all three. We'll talk about that at a different time. And thanks for all the congratulations in the notes, guys. We're pretty excited about 1 million downloads today. Also want to thank our sponsors of today's show. Our first sponsor is Holler Roast Coffee. If you want to start your day in luxury and have awesome premium handcrafted coffee shipped directly to your door in the U.S. or U.S. served postal systems, you can do it. Head to hollerroast.com and click on Coffee Shop to find out what we have up for offer, or just join our Coffee of the Month Club and you'll get something different every month, which is a lot of fun for a lot of people. The other sponsor, second sponsor of today's show, is EMP Shield. That's empshield.com. They created a device that not only helps against a possible EMP situation, helps protect your devices against that, but more importantly, they help you when lightning strikes. And we actually had somebody have a lightning strike over the weekend and have a lot of stuff go wrong with their solar system. And I realized I don't have an EMP shield on my solar system. So I'm fixing that by going to empshield.com, using coupon code LFTN to get that on our solar system. Because I was like, wait a minute. Yeah, lightning can strike there too. But it's a device that helps protect you from fluctuations in the electrical grid, as well as surges caused by things like lightning. And it includes a $20,000 or $25,000 insurance policy. If it fails and something breaks on the other side of that device, they'll replace it up to $20,000 to $25,000, which is pretty cool. I don't know of any other device that includes that kind of guarantee. Of course, if you guys want to reach out to me and send me Stump the Sauce questions, we haven't had one of those in a long time, or send me a frugality tip, because we don't have one of those this week, you can do it, Nicole at livingfreeintennessee.com, NICOLE at livingfreeintennessee.com. Now, I know a lot of you are happy with this 4 p.m. Monday thing, and I think I'm going to keep streaming at 4 p.m. Monday on the regular, assuming I don't have other things in the way. So you can kind of count on the later in the day things. I have typically gone earlier in the day, but I'm noticing more of y'all hop on late in the day. So we'll be keeping this. The rest of if you want to see me again today, though, I'm going to be on Porterhouse and Teal's YouTube channel today at 7 o'clock Central, at 5 o'clock Pacific. We're going to talk about 75 Hard and some other stuff. And I haven't talked to Porterhouse in like 2 months. So I'm really looking forward to catching up on that. Then tomorrow at 12:30, we have a live stream with John Willis and Sky Pirate that might get put on hold because there's some stuff going on. So I reached out to Sky Pirate. Hopefully he still is able to hop on because of his job. And then John got a strike and he's not streaming on YouTube. So we may reschedule that. Don't know. But if not, then at 12:30 tomorrow, I will just do a live Q&A with y'all. So you're going to have to hop on and talk to me. Then, of course, interview shows are back. So if you want to get interviewed at LFTN, go to livingfreeintennessee.com and fill out the guest form. It's in the top navigation. Tomorrow, I am interviewing Josh the Renegade Butcher at 4 p.m. Not tomorrow, Wednesday at 4 p.m. So we will be doing sort of a late show on Wednesday as well. And then Thursday, some smack is going to be talked. Some smack is going to be talked. Some poop is going to be hurled because we've got Backwoods Butcher and the Renegade Butcher on a discussion about their head-to-head competition that they're doing at Self-Reliance Festival. That's 7 p.m. Central on Thursday. And then, of course, Friday, 10:30 in the morning, Homestead Happenings, as always. If you're wanting to get notices of these, the easiest way to do it is go to YouTube, subscribe to my channel, hit the bell, and subscribe, and you'll get notified every time we have a live stream. And on the Monday mail that I send out, which you can sign up for at livingfreeintennessee.com, I put the whole schedule on there so you know what is going to happen just in our network and otherwise. With that, it's time for our first segment of today's show, 7.27. 7 minutes, 27 seconds is on. What was the discount for EMT Shield? The discount code is LFTN. That's LFTN for Living Free in Tennessee. Every one of you gets like $50 off if you use it, as do I. So our first segment of today's show is Tales from the Prepper Pantry. This is where we talk about using what you store and storing what you use. And this is the first segment we ever created as a regular segment on the show. And I kind of thinking about like the advent of how the show even progressed based on that. And this one has just never gone away. So this week was a great week. I taught a canning class at Chef Brett's, and he got a whole bushel of green beans as part of that. I think I'm going to give them a few jars if I can get them back across the state, because I canned them all. I was like, what are you doing with these? He's like, And so I took all the green beans home and continued to can them this weekend. So I am now 2 jars short of my 60 jar goal, unless I give them some back. But that's okay, because I have 2 rows of beans with beans coming on. So either way, it doesn't matter to me. I had planned not to buy a bushel of beans, and then we ended up with that as part of the class. So that was a big jump start. It also meant I was snapping beans like most of the day yesterday. And then I also canned 7.5 quarts of tomato sauce, thanks to Rick, as well as the tomatoes coming off of my garden, as well as while I was at Brett's, they had a bunch of sauce tomatoes that they weren't going to be able to use up before they went bad. And I was like, well, I'll take those 2 and make tomato sauce. And that's all done. I got 5 pints of salsa canned. I like to have 24 by the end of the season. We're just starting to get peppers. So I was talking to Tactical about this, and I need more peppers sooner. So I'm going to try some stuff gardening wise to try to get sweet peppers sooner than now, because, like I think we'll get a surge of them in about 3 weeks. Well, we're getting the surge of tomatoes now. What I'm doing is freezing the tomatoes after I core them. But, it's kind of like, could we all be ripe at once? Could we all be ripe at once? It'd be really nice. I am greatly reducing the amount of stored commercial food in my pantry, because like I can store commercial spaghetti sauce, but I have all this tomato sauce going in, and I just like some of the things I store that are commercial, I do because it's convenient. or, like the redneck may not make his own spaghetti sauce, and I don't can spaghetti sauce. I can tomato sauce and make spaghetti sauce if I want it. So I'm more flexible on the way out of the jar. And so I asked him, I'm like, hey, if I give you the recipe for how to make that into spaghetti sauce, do you want tomato sauce? Like, will you do that? And he said, sure. So we'll see how that goes. The commercial spaghetti sauce tastes a little bit different than the stuff I do from homemade stuff, but it happens the way it happens. So I am still keeping 2 jars of commercial spaghetti sauce on hand and 4 cauliflower crust pizzas in the freezer at all times. Because the 1 jar will do 2 pizzas, and then I add cheese and I add other things. And on those nights when I have been horrible about planning meals, it is one of my go-to. Like, I have pre-made stuff, but like, you pull the pizza ripcord about twice a quarter here, and it's actually I told Tactical, like, I'd like to get better at making cauliflower crust, but I don't think that my energy is going that direction this year. So I just, every time I see them at the store, like the good ones, I buy them until we have 4 in the freezer, and then we use some, and then I buy them again, because you actually can't count on them being in the store around here. So it's kind of if I see it, I buy it. And I'm not in the grocery store that much. But right now, I'm 2 crusts short of my 4, so I got to go back to the store. It's a Sunday thing. I didn't do it last Sunday, though, because I was literally like, I was little domestic lady all day yesterday, doing canning and cleaning and canning and cleaning, and we didn't have water to the house. That's a different story for Friday. And so then, like, cleaning was a little weird without water, but I was doing other kinds of cleaning and canning, and it all worked out. Every time to turn the water on, I was filling a giant pot with water so I could use that water in the canning. And that's just how you operate. Like, I'm actually super thankful I don't have to run down the hill every time I need water with buckets and carry it up from the creek, which is what would have been happening here 100 years ago. So having a pump is awesome. It's totally awesome. And then we're doing green curry turkey this week, because most of you know I don't really like how poultry tastes. And so when I cook poultry, I spice the crap out of it. I did do that wings recipe last week. Actually tasted good without strong flavors. So I'm hoping to experiment with that on some thighs, and then I'll try white meat on chicken. But this is a big old hunk of turkey. It's just like a back quarter. And I am basically planning meals based on what's in the freezer with the stuff that needs to be used up. So I just go in there and I grab stuff, and then I look at it at the beginning of the week and I make up my mind about what's for dinner. Next up, we have the shopping report from Joe. And they actually went shopping twice because they screwed up and forgot to buy all the things they needed to buy. Our first trip Saturday started at the Dollar Tree. The cooler with the Venom I like, which must be a brand of some drink that they like, has been dead long enough that the drinks are now room temperature. And I'm not interested in Coke or Pepsi, so apparently he bought nothing there. Next, we went to Hobby Lobby so we could pick up art supplies. We'd not been there in a while, but there were not any significant changes. The parking lot was mostly full as usual, and we found what we wanted. We skipped Home Depot, and I figured I'd check online. So the next stop was Aldi. The pad I've been keeping in the car to record prices was in my car, and we are in a rental car due to our car breaking. So I'll grab another pad for next week. Went back home and realized we forgot to buy fruit. And so we discovered that some ladder supports we had ordered were Unix, which I thought was hilarious. This means missing their nuts. So they decided that they would go back to Hobby Lobby and get more stuff. And then they went to Home Depot and checked the price of a 2x4x8. And it was $325, which is up from $298 last week. So it's still doing a little bit of fluctuation there. It's still lower than its high, but it looks like it's bouncing a bit. Aldi had cherries, bananas, and cantaloupe. So that was all good to go. And a gallon of untainted regular remains $3.89.9. Next up, we have the frugality tip. This is where we share tips from y'all and we crowdsource them, and nobody emailed me, so there is not one. Next up, we have Operation Independence. That's where we talk about building local ongoing revenue into our lives. And for me, it's also been debt payoff. Actually, I paid off my second mortgage earlier this year, except for a chunk of it I had already rolled to a 0% card because it went up to 11% because it was on an adjustable rate mortgage or ARM, and it had gone up to 11%. So I rolled what I could, paying 3% for that, which is less than 11%. And then I sold a piece of property that my sister and I had owned together for a long time in another state. And with the balance of that, paid off my second mortgage, except for this hunk. I paid off that hunk today. So it's gone now. And all I have is the primary mortgage on this house, which is about $10,000 left, and it's at 4%. So I'm not in a hurry to pay that off, but it felt really good today to pay that off. And what I've been doing, and this is why I'm not buying a pool. I could have bought a pool with some of that money, right? But I was like, nope, we were going to do this because that card was going to go up in rate at the end of this year if I didn't pay it off. So I was like, I'll just knock it out a little early, be done with it. And then I can start saving for the pool, right? Or figure out how I'm going to get the pool. Anyway, that was pretty cool. And then the 7 skill series, the Homestead Starter Pack, all of the webinars are done. And if you bought those webinars and you didn't see some live, you can log in and the recordings are all uploaded. I'm sending out a survey asking you episode by episode, is there something that wasn't covered that you wish was? Because I'm going to go back through if there's anything you're like, I really thought we should cover this in the raising poultry thing or this in the curing meat thing. I'm going to go back through and do some add-ons to those things. And if you've already bought the course, you get those add-ons for free as part of it. And then package it later this year in time for Christmas as a pre-recorded item. So I'm really wanting to get good feedback on that. And I think the series was a success. My most popular session was the cheese making session where I actually failed the last cheese and then showed you how to save a failed cheese. But anyway, thank you, Facebook user. I'm very excited for paying off that hunk. And it's actually kind of like when I bought this house, 15 or 16 years ago, or started buying this house, I never thought we'd have it paid off, even in the 15 years. It always seemed like a big amount of money. And then I look in hindsight at how much I actually paid for this place over the lifetime of this place. And it's a lot because, and that's something I wonder, I'm glad I have this place, but I wonder if it would have been better to just scrimp and save and cash it out. I don't know. I had to pay money somewhere. So yeah, could I please have the link for purchasing that series? The homesteading series? Sure. I will drop it in, the show notes as we go, but I'm going to move on to the next topic. So you'll get a random link at if you go to NicoleSauce.com, the link to the series is right there. And I don't even have to drop it in the notes. You just have to know that my name is NICOLE, which is Nicole Sauce. Okay. Next up, we are going to get straight into the 1 million download episode celebration. And that is basically where we're at now. It's funny though. While I was looking for NicoleSauce.com, which 30-day reviews is kindly enough given to me, so you can see that. While we were doing that, all of my documents just disappeared off my computer. So we'll just have to do this from memory. That's okay. So there they are. It's back. So in 2016, it never crossed my mind that I'd be having a podcast about 1 million downloads. Never crossed my mind. All that crossed my mind was that I was frustrated in the job I had built for myself. I literally built the job for myself. And it was very clerical and very administrative. And I'm too creative for that kind of a job. And I needed a creative outlet. And I would go out of town and then I would come back into town and I would put my heart into the garden and the homestead. And I was on speed dial for people on how to can things, how to preserve things, how to deal with pests, all of these general homestead stuff. And I was like, well, why don't I start a podcast and I'll sort of have these episodes that I can drive people to. And I had 14 downloads on my second podcast. I had 80 something on the first one, but I had 14. And so I was like, well, I'm doing this for me more than anything else because I need to have a creative outlet. And luckily I was singing in a classical choir at that point already. And here we are. We passed, like, I looked in June and I was like, oh, there goes 1 million. And then I like quickly texted Toolman Tim. I'm like, what do I do? Because I hadn't been paying attention to that. And I was like, oh, I probably should like say something about that because yay. So we passed that number a little while ago, and the question came up, how do we celebrate? And I asked a few different people, like, what should I do? Like, I can put a little thing out and be like, yay, but I kind of want to do something for the community. Tim's like, why don't you give away 1 million Satoshis? And for those of you who don't know what a Satoshi is, it's a fraction of a Bitcoin. I don't know what 1 million Satoshis is worth right now. It was somewhere in the neighborhood of $300 when I bought them. And then I went out and bought Satoshis and put it in a wallet. And I realized I was like looking at our communication schedule, and it's like Girl Gun Weekend, Self-Reliance Festival, Poultry Processing Workshop, all of these things to promote. And I didn't want it to get lost in the shuffle. And so I waited until now to launch the celebration so we have time to talk about the celebration. And entering is super easy. If you go to livingfreeintennessee.com, there's a blog post that is it's going to be the second post down after this show comes out. If you go there while you're seeing this live, it's the top post, and it just says celebrating 1 million, or it's the 1 million view download celebration. And if you want to enter to win the Satoshis, all you got to do is find your favorite LFTN episode, share it on social. I don't care what social you share it on. I don't care if it's TikTok, Instagram, Facebook, Float. Does Float even still exist? Twitter, MeWe, wherever you are that you talk to people there. And tag me in that. And if I don't have an account there, then don't tag me in that. Use hashtag LFTN. And then there's a form in that blog post I told you about at Living Free in Tennessee that you fill out, and you just say, this is the episode I shared. This is where I shared it. You don't have to link to your post. Just tell me where you shared. I shared it on Facebook. I shared it on Facebook and YouTube. Can I share it on Telegram? You can share it on Telegram, but not in the LFTN group on Telegram. So choose a different group to share it on and then explain why in that group. And when I get that, then you are entered. And if you share multiple episodes that you really liked, then you're entered more than once. It's that simple. I will actually put a highlight in navigation linking to that form so that as that blog post gets pushed down the page by other things that we've produced, it will still be findable for the next 4 weeks. That's what we're doing. And then I'm going to check out the stuff that you most liked about LFTN. And I'm going to learn a lot from that. I'm going to actually create an on-ramp page for people who are new to the podcast from your favorite episodes, because your favorite episodes are more important than my favorite episodes, even the squash episode. So we really started as this creative outlet for me. And then next thing I know, people were interested in listening to it. And we became a show. And we became a show with multiple people helping. And then we transitioned from a show to a community. And that journey has happened over the last 16, 17, 18, 19, 20, 21, 22, 7 years. We're 7 years old. Got to do something for the 10-year anniversary tier 2 in a couple of years. And watching that transition to a community of doers for me, it's been really humbling, and it's been also inspiring, because your stories are more inspiring to me than my stories, right? So it's been an interesting journey. And today what I wanted to do was kind of go through some of the people who have influenced the podcast Speak of the Devil. Tactical just jumped on. And when I made this list, some of these people aren't here anymore, and they just sort of have come and gone, and sometimes they come back. there are people I'm not going to mention who I should mention. And I was kind of hesitant to jump into this because there's going to be somebody really important I haven't mentioned. And, you know, I will, I'll have to just go back through and be like, I should have said this person. But I'm going to start with one that we haven't heard from in a while. I have actually seen her posts on social, but I haven't heard from her here in our community in a while. And that's 40 Acres in a Cave Dory. When I was in Medford, Oregon, and my grandma had just died, and my stepmom was in the hospital with a heart attack, and I was snowed in with all my grandma's stuff looking at it. I wasn't feeling super happy. And I got an email from this lady named Dory who was like, "Hey, I listened to your podcast. It's changed my life. I'm thinking about buying this property." And she described this property that's 40 acres and a cave that used to be a restaurant. And so she like crashed the scene and started doing episodes with us. And over that time, she changed for, she started growing her own tomatoes from seeds, and she started paying down and ultimately paid off her debt and just completely changed the trajectory of her life. And she's been on the show a few times. You can go back and listen to episodes, but she became a friend too. And that was just really cool. And then we have one of our squash people who, it's somebody I didn't get to meet in person till this year, but she was active in our social media groups very early on. And I didn't realize it was a squash episode that brought her to us, but she's right there in comments. It's Janet Szabo, or Szabo. I don't know how to say her last name. I've asked you, I know, but I have the attention span of a gnat. So, but she knows so much about sewing, knitting, weaving, fibers, all sorts of stuff. And she's just been a hugely empowering part of our community. She helped connect people early on when there weren't very many of us to connect, and then has stuck with us through, thick and thin over the years. And we get to see her at Self-Reliance Festival this time. She came out and did a presentation at my workshop, which people just loved, about sewing. And you think the funny thing is a lot of people have interesting skills that they're awesome. And they think it's easy. And they're like, why would anybody care? And then you start saying, well, I can show you how to make beer, or I can show you how to sew, or I can show you how to extend the life of your clothing by maintaining it. And all of a sudden they're surprised to see all these people listening. And I kind of got that feeling from Janet. But she's encouraged me personally when times were tough. And most recently, I got a very excited email from her about spinning with lots of advice. So she's been helping me as I'm learning how to spin, link with resources. And it's been a very positive influence on the podcast. Then we have Sean and Dawn Mills. And I had been doing Living Free in Tennessee for about a year before I went to Jack Spirko's the first time I went to Jack Spirko's place. And I went to present on how to roast coffee. And because I really felt alone in the world. And I was hoping to meet people who were shared interests, and I gave my presentation. And at the end, I was like, and my podcast is Living Free in Tennessee. And Sean Mills walks up to me. He goes, my wife listens to you. And we got to talking, and then he ended up doing a last minute presentation on solar. I'm like, this is the first time solar's ever made sense to me. It turned out he lived in Tennessee. So then later that year, when I announced I wanted to do an in-person workshop, because I think it's really important that we have an in-person workshop as part of this podcast every year. And it's almost like a family reunion for some, but it's also a way for people new to the network to come in and meet people who have shared interests. It's the same thing that I needed when I went to Jack's, right? He was in a sales job at that time. And so he was driving all over the tarnation. He just happened to be driving by my house, and he's like, let me stop by. And I was like, sure, have a cup of coffee. And he sat at my table across from me, and he's like, what can I do to help? And he and a bunch of other people in Tennessee ended up turning into the Tennessee GSD crew and helping me clean up my property, which was a wreck, so that I could like feasibly have my first spring workshop. And then I met his wife through that. And I will just say that she is awesome. And that without Dawn at events, not enough karaoke is sung. I'm just going to say that right there. So she's also, not only is she great and a good friend, but she incites people to having fun. She has a gift in that direction. So that was really cool. And then we have Brian in Tennessee. I'm not going to say some last names here. If you know, you know. He has been at almost everything I've done from the beginning. He was at the Eclipse Party, which was the pre-workshop when I had the podcast, but I was not doing a paid event because I wanted to do a free event and see what we needed to do to make it an enjoyable experience. And he showed up and like took over a whole meal and cooked it, which was awesome. He has always been willing to bring his giant smoker out and smoke things. Plus, he's been a personal friend to me, again, encouraging me when I'm not feeling encouraged in the background. And then a big powerhouse behind the Tennessee GSD crew. He's the one who's organized, like, he has best practices put together on putting together a GSD or Get Shit Done group, and has shared that all over whenever anybody else wants to start one. And there's AutoFab. AutoFab I knew from the Zello group, and he started listening to my podcast because of that. And then he threw a workshop at his place, grafting. And because he's community minded, he reached out to me and he was like, hey, I'll buy coffee from Hollow Roast and then it'll be cool. And I was like, well, I'll come to your grafting workshop and then you can say Nicole Sauce is coming and maybe that'll help get some people there. And that was the first time I met the dude in person. And I'd been kind of talking to him over time. And I think without AutoFab, we also wouldn't have the Tennessee GSD crew, because he was one of the first GSD events where he roasted a pig over Memorial Day. And we came over and just, because when you get a bunch of doers together, you can't like not do stuff. Even like you might be sitting around the fire drinking a beer, but like how long can you sit around the fire before you're like, okay, let's go do something. And so we started doing these projects, and that all happened because of AutoFab. Well, while at AutoFabs, I met this lady who made really good cupcakes named Jenny. And it was the first time I met her, and I understood that she knew how to run a kitchen. So I asked her to come oversee the kitchen for my first spring workshop. And that's the Jenny, you know, word of the year Jenny, right? So she started, every so often I get this text message, hey, if I stop by for a couple hours today, I'm out and about. And she'd just stop by, hang out, and leave. And because of that, I got to know her. And if I didn't have time, I said no. And if I did have time, I said yes. Up until she became a holler neighbor when she was like, the only other female in the holler, which is a lot of men around here. And there's a lot of dude like energy. And sometimes that's fine. I love dude energy, but sometimes I want girl energy. And so I'd be like, I got to go to Jenny's house when she was here. But the other thing Jenny did is she brought a lot of insightful observations about y'all, because she's pretty active in our social. And so she has an idea of what's going on in people's lives. And she'll say, you know, might be good to work this topic in, or I've noticed this person needs help. And what happened after that is we started these, occasionally we have an anonymous giving thing where we help somebody in a crisis situation get over the crisis. And I'll put it out and I'll be like, send money here. I'm not going to tell you what it's for, because it's usually something very bad has happened to somebody and they need help with it. And they don't want their business all over the internet. So that kind of started because Jenny started noticing some people needed help. And I'm really sad that she is dealing with a cancer diagnosis right now. It's been a rough year for Jenny. So, and you all came out to really support her. Then we have Mark Alexander, who is no longer with us. He got so excited about my podcast. Same thing. He reaches out to me. You don't know me, but I'd really like to stop by and give you some meat, because he was raising pigs and other things. And he comes over and okay, so this is like so Jack Spirko has a lot of ideas. If you're ever around him, he's like, idea, 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 idea. And that's normal of any of us who are kind of in the entrepreneurial world. Okay, well, Mark Alexander has like 15 times the amount of ideas that Jack Spirko does. And so when you would sit with him, he would be like, you should do this. And it was like bleh, like vomit of stuff you should do, which maybe sounds overwhelming, right? But it wasn't. He ended up becoming a really good friend. And he came up with great ideas for us, including the poultry processing workshop that we now do every single year. And the reason we have the plucker and the scalder is because his wife gifted those to us when he passed. And he was also somebody who would just once or twice a year, he'd be like, is anybody in the network struggling? And I would say, well, this name I know and that name I know. And they would end up with a mysterious box of meat because he was really good at producing meat from his land. And he always was somebody who felt like he should give forward. And he did that for the podcast, he did that for the community, and he did that in many, many other ways, touched a lot of people. But the best part about Mark is that he was mischievous and a kind of a prankster. So he had a really good sense of humor. And sometimes when stuff's going wrong, all you need to hear is a dang joke. And you need to stop taking things so seriously. And that was something like I take things seriously at this podcast, but I also don't. I also think that a lot of what we wrap ourselves up around is when we look back in 20 years, we're going to be like, I cared about that? Really? And then, if we can get out of that seriousness or the serious mindset in the moment, that actually gives us a chance if there's a problem to find a better solution because we stop being emotionally wrapped up in the bad and we start seeing the funny. Mark was like awesome at getting that to happen. And then there's Mr. Spirko. I met Jack at his place and I didn't expect it to be anything other than I met Jack at his place and I won on the barter blanket that he would show up anywhere in the US. So I brought him to my first spring workshop. And without that, I think it would have been a lot harder to sell tickets because having a big name that first time was super helpful. And Jack is well supported in Tennessee. But I also, over the years, became friends with him. And like close friends, like brother, sister friends, and his wife, Dorothy. And from time to time, this is how Jack works. He will say something. I'll be like, what do I need to do to grow the podcast? And he will say something like, I think most people make the biggest mistake in the following way. Hello, Life Done Free. We're going to talk about you in a bit. So Jack has occasionally said a word or two to me on the way through. Like he told me to raise my coffee prices when he saw how cheap it was. And I instantly went up in sales. And he has done that over time, but he has also given me opportunities to tap into his relationships to grow faster, which is an immense amount of trust. When he added me to Unloose the Goose, we doubled because what most people know about me is I'm a liberty thinker. And I've spent a lot of time actually diving into libertarian and anarchistic and all sorts of these philosophical documents and ways of thinking. And then I've spent a lot more time saying, but what does that mean in real life? And he knew that about me, but most people don't know that about me because my goal in life isn't that Living Free in Tennessee is like a great libertarian podcast or a great anarchist podcast. I'm an anarchist. I am liberty oriented. I love freedom and I will talk about it. But when we only talk about that and don't talk about real life, people have a hard time wrapping their heads around how this theoretical thing or way of living can equal something they can do now in their life. And so I try to share living the life from the perspective of being a free person in tangible ways so that more people do that and worry less about why they're doing it. I actually don't care if I don't care if you call yourself a libertarian or anarchist, but if you are willing to take responsibility for your bad decisions, and if you are willing to build your life, and if you are willing to do that without asking for a handout from the government, like, that's a pretty good start. I don't care what you call yourself, right? Well, Jack knew that about me. He brought me into Unloose the Goose and onto other projects. And those have been huge in helping this show grow. I mean, he put me on his expert council. Boom. Then we have Jack's friend David, whose whole name I won't say on my podcast, also known as the Booze Whisperer. Jack was like, how'd you get that guy to record stuff for you? I was like, I don't. I get him on Zello and I ask him for a cocktail recipe, and then I save the audio file, and that's how I get him to record. Like, I trap him into it while he is driving somewhere talking to me. And we used to have a weekly recipe that was a cocktail or a mocktail, and they mostly came from the Booze Whisperer, because this dude can mix a drink unlike anybody I know. And he has owned bars in the past, I believe. So he was the connection between me and Jack ultimately. So Jack and I became friends, but I think if David and I hadn't become friends first, Jack and I wouldn't have, because he's Jack's best friend. That's not why I became friends with David. I have a whole coffee named after him, like a roast level named after this dude. But he also has reached out to me from time to time and said, I've noticed that maybe you need to change this about your podcast because that's not a good look for you, Nicole. He will give me very carefully critical feedback. It's almost like he's afraid I can't take it. And I'm like, I'm pretty good at taking critical feedback, especially when I know somebody really well and they're not just being a doofus about it. Every time, like, the funny thing about him is he can see like years in the future where I'm going to be. And he'll be like, eventually you're going to outsource the roasting of your coffee. And I'm like, no, I won't. And now I am looking at outsourcing some of the roasting of my coffee. So he was right again. But he's been a big powerhouse behind this podcast that nobody even knows about, but he has. Then we have the Knife Maker. When I first met Patrick, it was at Jack's. So this is why you go to things like Jack's or my workshop. You're going to notice lists of people that I met at that first event that made my podcast successful. And Patrick was one of them. He has been to every event I've thrown here. He's like, I only go to yours and Jack's events consistently. And I'm like, that's awesome. So he puts his, star power behind that whole thing. And he was sitting there and we're talking and we're like shooting the shit basically at Jack's. And I go, you know what? You're an asshole. And he just laughed. He's like, I am. And I was like, yeah, you are. When I say that about somebody, I mean it nicely. I mean that you're willing to set boundaries and stand up for what you believe in. And Patrick is 100% that. Like, he is a great father. He is a great friend. He's a very loyal person. And he would call me about once a month, when I was, after we met, and he'd be like, so your labels, Nicole, the ink is rubbing off on my coffee, because he buys my coffee. Or he'd say, what are you using for shipping? And are you paying full price, or have you figured out how to save money on your shipping? Like, he would sort of do coaching in that way. And we became great friends over the years. And I got to know his wife and his kids. And I don't know if there are more kids recently, but he keeps having more kids. So I can't keep up with all of that. But he's been a great addition to the show. Actually, I hope we get him back on for an interview soon, because he's been building his homestead in Missouri. They've been building it like from scratch on land. And I think you all would be really interested in some of the stuff they've done there. Okay, now we have the next one. It's the maker of the shirt I'm wearing today, John Willis of SOE. In 2020, my word of the year was grow. And I did the opposite of grow when COVID hit. My revenue went to zero. And John Willis heard one of my podcasts, and the podcast was the essence of this podcast was, fuck it, I'm going to grow anyway. And excuse my F, but I'm saying it today. And it was that we had turned a corner, and it didn't matter what the world was doing. If it was falling apart, I had to decide to grow in order to be successful with the word grow. And so I'm all in. And like that episode got recorded. Like the next day, John's like, hey, do you want to do a coffee with me? And I looked back at our chat history, and he had reached out to me like on and off over the last couple of years. And I'd been like, hey, can I come out and meet you in person on my way through? And he'd never answered that. And then I looked, and he had answered. He's like, yeah, my business hours are this, right? Because that's John. And Facebook had not shown me those messages, which is why I try not to depend on Facebook Messenger for communications, because half the time I A, don't get notice, or B, I'll look back at a conversation and see that there were answers that never showed up for me. And I was like, oh, great. So I'm the person who dissed John Willis. But I was like, okay, I'll roast some coffees and send you some coffees. I'd love to do a coffee with you. And he was like, I listened to your podcast. I thought it was a good podcast, blah, blah, blah. So I decided, rather than to ship them to him, to drive 3 hours and taste them in person. And I usually do pour over cones, but not thinking ahead, I didn't order them on the Amazon that day. And it was 2020, the year of the rolling shortages, which went on for years. And you could not just go to Walmart and buy a coffee cone. Something that had never occurred to me you couldn't do. And so I had everybody in the hauler give me their canning funnels, and I brought coffee filters, and I had one pour-over cone, and I had all these canning funnels. I had to look like a total mess when I came in there, and I let them taste multiple coffees, and he chose a coffee, and we decided to do it, to co-brand a coffee. And he asked me, like, how many is the most you can roast? And I told him, and he said, I'll take twice that many. And then he followed me out to the car, and he said, I kind of understood from your podcast that you're maybe financially challenged right now, and do you want me to pay for this now? And I appreciated that, because it kind of showed a side of him. I think part of his motivation for reaching out to me that day was that I had decided to grow, and he could hear the determination, but he also understood that I was in this community and needed to sell some coffee. And what happened from there was I was like, no, let me get the coffee, and I'll deliver it, and then we can settle up, because I prefer to deliver product over getting money first. Did that, and then my roaster caught on fire. And I ended up launching a Kickstarter that year, and he donated like thousands of dollars of SOE gear to that as giveaways to get, and he promoted the crap out of my Kickstarter. And every time I see John, he's like, what's next, Nicole? Okay, you did this thing. What's next? He's always asking me, what's next? And so I don't like it when I don't have an answer to that. Last time I had too many answers and I couldn't choose one. I was like, the problem is I have too many. I actually need to settle on something. So yeah, that he changed the landscape of the podcast a lot. And then we started doing Self-Reliance Festival. And it's like I've gone from just homesteader domestic lady to I can now like handle a gun confidently and a whole bunch of other stuff. So that was pretty cool too. Then we have Nighthawk. Nighthawk has been around since pretty much the beginning, and he has lived next door to me for years. And he's always here. Well, he's the best parking Nazi there is in the hauler. So he can fit more cars in this hauler. People are like, how do you park everybody? I'm like, Nighthawk parks everybody. Nighthawk knows anywhere you can stick a car in the hauler. And we've gotten 80 people here without much, like it wasn't even a stretch for him. So I might have to do a 100-person event just to see if he can. But Nighthawk has been, he's somebody, when we asked him what his purpose in life is, he said it's to help other people thrive. So he's like a catalyst for people. He likes to work behind the scenes. And every so often we get him on a podcast. Okay, this next one is going to be surprised that I'm mentioning him because we don't talk much anymore, but it's Ford. when I started the podcast, I got up to episode 7 or 8. I think it was 7. And I was doing them once a week consistently for 7 episodes. And then here's what happened. Ooh, flatline. And here's what was going on. I had a member of my family getting brain surgery. I had another member of my family sick. And I had 14 downloads per episode, which was not very inspiring. And one of those downloads was mine, and the other one was Mom. So I really only had 12. And he was on a Zello channel that I'm still on, and 3 weeks go by, no episode. And he's like, "Nicole, are you ever going to record another episode?" And then I was like, "Oh, somebody's listening and actually wants the next episode. It's not just that I'm doing this for me, like somebody actually wants to hear it." And had he not asked the question, I'm not sure I would have done episode 8, which is the squash episode. Now, the infamous squash episode is why Janet came to us, because it's 8 ways or 7 ways or some number of ways to use squash. I should actually look this up so I know the number of ways. It might only just be 4, but it's episode 8. And I shared squash recipes because I had so much squash that needed to be used. And I'm hearing people talking about squash that needs to be used. And it was, people's people's zucchini things and all of that. So episode 8 is not coming up in search. What is up with that? So I shared a bunch of recipes, and a number of people who listen to me care not about freedom and they care not about homesteading, but they're really interested when I share recipes. So, that attracted a lot of people. Here it is. 5 ways to prepare summer squash and zucchini, episode 8, July 23rd, 2016, 2 weeks before the brain surgery happened. And then all I did was share the recipes, and they're not written on my site, but they have been shared as recipes of the week. I don't know if I should go back and redo this episode, but I've heard a lot of people liked this one. And it brought a lot of people in. So that's why episode 8 even happened. I think I came to LFTN after Nicole was on the expert council and asked her a question. And I thought it was only nice to subscribe to her podcast. So thank you for answering my question, Tori. I feel like I should give you the look just because when I give you the look, you squirm. But I've sent you a picture of the look now, so you can look at that anytime you want to. You could add to it and have another 5 ways. Okay, so speaking of 30-day reviews, you're next on my list of people who have influenced the podcast. This dude reaches out to me, and he does video editing and occasionally has edited videos for me. He was like, Nicole, your YouTube channel looks like crap. And you're doing all those live feeds. Maybe your YouTube channel shouldn't look like crap. How about I fix it for you? He just sort of did all the graphics for the YouTube channel and is always on these live streams, like trying to make sure y'all get links. So I've always appreciated that. Plus, I've known Justin a long time. Then we have Mike Vertreese, who may or may not still be a Tennessee homesteader on YouTube. I heard him on Jack's show before I met Jack, and he was talking about, he does this soil biology thing by making compost tea, and it's really cool. And if you don't know how to do it, you should pay him lots of money for him to teach you how to do it. But I heard him talk about that. I was like, oh, you're in Tennessee. This is cool. So I reached out to him, and we ended up talking and becoming friends. And I drove down to Jack's with him that time. So my first time at Jack's, I knew one person, and that was Mike Vertreese. And he walked in. And when you walk in on that first night, everybody knows everybody, and you're new and nobody knows you. And he immediately found Jake Robinson and handed me off to Jake, who then talked my ears off. He totally talked my ears off. But it was really nice to have somebody who at least I knew who they were at that event before I went down. And ever since then, he helped me get my workshop up and off the ground. He's gone through a few iterations of his homestead. I'm really excited about the content he's making on YouTube now. I hope he keeps doing it, Mike. Keep making videos. But he was instrumental in helping link Homesteaders of Middle Tennessee with my podcast, which that helped me grow a lot because I didn't know the Homesteaders of Middle Tennessee group even existed on Facebook. And back in the day, you could actually share your podcast episodes on there and people would listen to them. Now they've, people don't want a bunch of everybody here's my contenting them. It's more centered on questions about homesteading. And so you don't do that there anymore. Next, we have Nick Ferguson. And he reached out to me early on and we started talking and I brought him up for a permaculture consult, like way back when I was like completely upside down on my homestead. Without him, this homestead wouldn't be running the way it should be. But also without him, I don't think I would have as many friends in the homesteader community because he introduced me to a lot of people like John Moody and a whole bunch of other folks from that whole like arm of homesteaders. And he's just been super empowering to the podcast and to me. Then we have Dawn Gorham of Gorham Homestead in Dixon County, Tennessee, who started the Homesteaders Alliance group. But I think she started listening to me and then she came to Self-Reliance Festival. We got to know each other in person. And I saw this chick across the state doing what I love to do, which is teaching canning classes. And she built a cannery. And I was like, that's badass. And she's a natural networker. So when she started coming into our community, I was like, yep, that just nails down the west part of the state. It's perfect. So she helped bring a lot of people in and continues to be a powerhouse behind Self-Reliance Festival. Paul Wheaton. This one I never expected to happen. Like one day, Paul Wheaton's assistant reaches out to me. He's like, can we sponsor your show? And that must be Dawn because she says I started listening in 2019 and it's just Facebook user. So I assume that's her. Paul Wheaton's assistant reached out to me and said, can we sponsor the show? And I was like, yeah. And we talked about it. And that was great. But what's been way better is that they have actively, they have pursued me relentlessly to remind me they exist and to interact on their forums. And this year was a little, like the last 2 years have been a little time constrained. So I haven't always been the best at jumping over to permies.com and doing stuff. But the work they're doing there is really awesome. And because they've been so enthusiastic, I have finally learned how to use permies.com, which for me was a bit of a learning curve, I'm going to admit, and it was kind of funny, and Bo will probably laugh when he hears this. But they also opened me up to a whole new network of people who have, started interacting with us. And the more of us there are who are doers, the better off we all are and the better off the world is. Okay, this next one, you're probably wondering, why have you not mentioned this one? Because I can't do all my squash people at one time. But this one also came through the squash episode, and it's the Tactical Redneck. And he was stationed in North Carolina, I believe, or South Carolina. I can't remember. Okay, one of the Carolinas. And he was getting ready to go to Guantanamo. No, not as a prisoner of war. He was going to go work there. And so I've been listening to this guy like liquidate everything because he's got to get rid of all his stuff to go over there. And he loves food. And so I did the squash episode and he I don't know what it was about. Guys, I'm telling you, probably you have to listen to the squash episode because that was instrumental in the birth of the podcast growing. And he started talking to me on Zello more, and we became, again, brother, sister, friends. There are people in this world that you just relate to so well. It's almost like you should have been born to the same mother, but you weren't. So that's kind of where we're at. And eventually he moved to the Holler and has become basically my business partner in the homestead here. Before Tactical came, I was doing the homestead basically by myself. And after he came, it was like, wow, this is what it's like when two people work a lot on the homestead. And it was a totally different experience. And the homestead's a totally different place because of it. And, you can homestead by yourself. So don't let this discourage you because you can't, because I did for a decade. You do need to bring in that outside help from time to time if you're doing that, or at least have heavy equipment. And when there's more than one person working on the project, it's actually nicer. I mean, I can see why farmers had 12 kids. It's lots of people to help. And then they move away and hopefully close by so they can come back and help. But he has been, both a great friend. He's been here through thick and thin. And he's always trying to think of ways to grow the podcast. In fact, he keeps threatening to do video work with me, but we haven't done it. So we'll see. He's been shooting some videos, and come to think of it, I have like the chicken composting series that we did. So you'll start seeing some of his work over time. And then we have Oxy, the savings ninja. Remember those segments, guys? If you've been listening to the podcast a long time, Oxy used to record me segments, and actually she could now, and I'd totally play it, where she would come up with great ideas for saving money. And she's a master of like, so you can buy this $100 gift card for Lowe's for $75 at this location, and then you compare that with their rewards card and get dollars in rewards, and then you get an extra card. Like, she'll put together stuff like that. That's pretty amazing. And I have, in fact, gotten $500 worth of Lowe's cards for $400 because of that woman on more than one occasion. But back when we needed, a way to really pump up the Operation Independence area and talk about some ways you can live frugally, her savings ninja tips were really helpful. In fact, now that I've said this out loud, I need to reach out to Oxy and see if she has any new tips. Okay, now, we had Life Done Free in here a little while ago. I don't know if he's still here. So Tag from Life Done Free. Tag and I got to know each other just because we came across each other at an event. And he, without hesitation, has cross-promoted everything I do and has sponsored events that I do, and has basically been an advisor and an empowerer. And he networked me into the whole Midwest Preparedness, where Mississippi came from, Midwest Preparedness Project crew, who have been hugely helpful to the podcast, but also to the community. And I don't know what possessed him to do that for me, but thank you, because it's been great. And I try to cross promote back, and I hope I send him like even a percentage of what he did. John, you missed your thank you for my millionth download. I told the whole John Willis story, but welcome to the live feed. Yeah, I could have waited till you came on and then done it. Okay, next up we have Margot, who is the frugality tip maven. But I can tell you this, anytime there's a typo or one of my audio files is messed up, she tells me pretty quickly. And that's really important to me, because usually my audio files are fine, but every so often they're not. And that really helps keep the show quality going. I've had a couple episodes that just like shut off in the middle. And I think what happens is they were uploading and my internet shut off and I didn't know it on the production side. Yep. Tag, can't wait to do a whole bunch more together. We're gonna be together soon in Kansas. Letty. Anybody who's on social media knows about Letty. And what they don't know about Letty, here's what you know about Letty. She will offer to moderate any group I ask her to moderate, which is work. But it's because she likes to go out on the internet and find memes of ban hammers and find the funniest ones, so that every time she bans somebody, she can like put another meme in. And because of that, this year I asked her to help me create memes for Self-Reliance Festival, because she cracks me up. And the funniest meme I've seen so far actually came out this morning. And if you want to see it, go to the Self-Reliance Festival's Instagram page and look, and just email me and tell me which meme you think I think is funniest, because she has a way with those things. Next up, we have Dixie, Jessica Mills, who again has cross-promoted, just like Tag, has cross-promoted anything we have ever done that I've been like, hey, can you post this to your network? And this is somebody who makes her living hiking, through hikes and sharing stories about hiking. Homemade Wanderlust is her channel. Definitely go check out that channel. But her network of people are not necessarily preppers, right? Like, there are people who like to hike, and some of them are and some of them aren't, and that is what it is. But she's willing to share my weird stuff, like Self-Reliance Festival, which isn't that weird, but some people think it's weird, to her network anytime. And she has also been, I think she's my only close female friend who is a personality, or thank you, Dan. Thank you, Dan. She's the only person who's female who has also built a following and has the problems that women have that have built a following, or who have built a following. And so she and I have been able to talk in the background about some things that, like, if I talk to my dude friends about it, they're like, just go beat him up or whatever it is, which has been very helpful throughout the growth, because I took things a lot more personally 5 years ago than I do now. I just don't care. But it takes a little while, if you do not have a thick skin, to develop a thick skin. And she and I have helped each other develop thick skins over the years. I watched her get just attacked by people who were accusing her of being racist for not taking a stand on something that had nothing to do with hiking. And because her trail name is Dixie, and they were demanding that she change it. And if you don't know how trail name comes to be, it's basically assigned to you when you're hiking. So it was a name that everybody else gave her when she went on her first thru hike on the Appalachian Trail. So she was like, I'm not doing it. I'm not going to come out and take stands on things. And people went after her hard. And I wish we could have done more to defend her than to come out and say, like, this is ridiculous. But you know what? She's still here. And the people who went after her didn't really make a difference, didn't as negative an impact as they thought she was. And there's a lesson in that. If you are ever on the receiving end of a lot of internet hate, is it may not feel good when it's happening, but it's probably not going to make that big of a difference if you just keep going and keep your priorities straight and keep your core principles. Don't change your core principles just because people demand that you do. Okay. PA Prepper. We couldn't do this show without talking about PA Prepper. My website is hosted on his hosting service, but that dude has spent hours helping me troubleshoot web problems that you don't even know about. Hours. So without him, we would not have made 1 million downloads. Here's a good one. So I bought a place with Tactical Redneck, and it was trashed. And I was like, the first thing we need to do is get rid of the spiral staircase, because I'm going to fall down it and break my leg. And then I don't care if we never put a stairway back in, but I want it out. And so I scheduled a GSD weekend, and this cat, Ken, shows up with his wife, Carmel. And we're like over there working. I was like, oh, somebody who listens to the podcast. Cool. Nice to know you. Turns out he's a carpenter. And this is how this went. So we're over there. The spiral staircase is out. The whole thing started at, like, I don't know, 8 or 9 in the morning. And it was like 9:30, half an hour. Spiral staircase is like out and out the door. And I got like $900 for that thing, by the way. And Ken's like, so Nicole, is there somewhere where you can get materials nearby? I'm like, yeah, I can go get them. He's like, do you want to rebuild a stairway here? I was like, well, I'd love to. I wasn't planning to do that today. Do you think we could? He's like, yeah. And he does this. Puts his hand on his head and is just like looking down for like 2 minutes. And then he gets up and writes a materials list and hands it to me. And I go to the store. I come back, an hour or two later, because it took a while to get the stuff. And he and Carmel and anybody else who would help built a stairway that day. So in one day, we got the stairs out and we got the stairway built. And then I discovered that he wanted to be a life coach, and he has become that. He's also an awesome carpenter. He's built the stage for Self-Reliance Festival. He's done a bunch of work here. And he has a podcast that you should check out. So that's Ken. And next we have Leos. Leos has edited everything I've written that needs to be edited. And it's always like, hey, Leos, so I'm releasing a book in half an hour. Do you think you could just look through it for typos? And he will. He'll be like, okay, once again, Nicole is on that tight deadline that she's always on. Next up, we have Chef Brett. Chef Brett told me I should be targeting preppers with my podcast when I was targeting homesteaders. And I was like, what's a prepper? Because I didn't know I was a prepper. So Chef taught me what a prepper was, and he taught me how to process pigs, and he taught me, I already knew how to process chickens, and he taught me how to make bacon, and he taught me how to make ham, and he taught me what a sous vide was, and he's taught me a lot of things that have made my life much richer. But he's always been somebody who's like, hey, are you interested in this? Listen to Nicole's podcast. That's Brett. That's been very helpful to us. Matt and Ashley. Matt is the electrician who has single-handedly made sure that, so Matt was here yesterday because Tactical touched the gutter of the cabin and it shocked him. And then we unplugged the cabin from the grid and it was still shocking him, which was a problem. So we had to figure that out. And that was Saturday. And I'm like, if there's electric current going through the gutter, is that a fire hazard? And then Matt shows up because Matt, you say the word fire, he's like, I'm there. And he spent like half his Sunday, which is his day off, over here trying to troubleshoot this whole thing and left. And I believe we have it done now. But Matt and Ashley have been in the community, very active in helping to cross promote LFTN. And they've just been, just good community-minded people. It's been great. Scott from the Liberty Lab. Here's how this went down. 2016, I started a podcast. 2017, okay, so my podcast was originally produced at NicoleSauce.com. So the podcast was called Living Free in Tennessee. And the website was NicoleSauce.com. And the podcast was called Living Free in Tennessee. And the website was NicoleSauce.com. You see the problem there? People were confused. And then I realized I was going on Jack Spirko's show and I better get my poof together. And I'm like, Scott, I need a website and I don't have any time to build it myself. And by the end of the day, livingfreeintennessee.com was built and launched. And when I launched livingfreeintennessee.com, that's another time I doubled listenership. It was like the change from NicoleSauce.com to livingfreeintennessee.com, which makes it very ironic that now we have NicoleSauce.com as the central hub for everything, for the podcast, for Self-Reliance Festival, and for Hollow Roast. It was all the pieces were there. I just didn't have them all organized. It's typical. It's like I scatter and then I make piles, and that's what we had to do. So Scott made that happen, and I was like, "How much will that be?" He was like, "Nothing." So Scott occasionally gets a box of coffee. He occasionally gets a box of coffee in the mail for doing that for me. Couldn't do this episode without Mama Sauce. She has done so much to hold things together. And she's my operations director. I actually haven't had my operations director since about May because some stuff has been going on. But without her being the operations manager, we wouldn't be where we are today. Plus, she's a great lady. Then we have Carrie and Angel, who, wow. You ever have a thing where on your computer, it's like, hey, do you want me to shut everything and install this? It just did that. No, not right now. I swear, if I'm ever logged into something on Google, which I know I'm not supposed to use Google, but I do, it'll log out in the middle of a show. It's guaranteed to do that. So Carrie and Angel started coming to things and just volunteering to set up, and then started connecting me with people in the permaculture world, which was super awesome and really helped the show grow. Billy Bond. When I got to know Billy Bond, which was through Matt and Gabby from Homesteading for a Living. So it's like that Homesteading for a Living, Permapastures connection was another time that, because they enthusiastically embraced my podcast and cross-promoted it, I went up about 25% in listeners. And that was instrumental in going from, it's like that paired with John Willis took me over 1,000 on YouTube, and then it was 2 and 3, and like just keeps going up. Without those, I don't know that that would have happened. Then we have Rebecca Cunningham, the lady who does all the video work. When we have somebody do video work, it makes live streams work at shows. She's been also a really good friend to me, and that's been awesome. Eric Myers, part of the Tennessee GSD crew. Here's one that he's going to be like, why am I in this show? Because he moved to Tennessee and just quietly in the background made things better. That's why. And then I would be lax not to mention Ryan Steva and the Renegade Homesteaders and John Pugliano and Dr. Ken Berry. All of them have been not only encouraging and friendly, but happy to cross-promote and help anytime they can. John and Ken come to events and speak all the time, and then their followers come to events, which is helpful for events. But they've also given me some pretty good advice in the background. Brent from BBC Inc. Nobody will know who he is. When I did a show on feeding my dogs raw and like wanting to make that transition, he sent me an email saying how I make that transition. When I have launched Self-Reliance Festival, he was the second person to reach out to sponsor the event. The girls from the ladies from Renegade were the first. When I have done anything, Brent has been there cheering me on, and it's been awesome. John Bush from Live Free Academy had me out to start speaking at his events, which gave me exposure to his network and brought in a lot of great listeners. He's challenged me a few times in ways that are uncomfortable for me. But in the end, being uncomfortable is how you grow, and it's been great. And I love that he has built such a fervently freedom-oriented community online. And that Exit and Build Land Summit's really awesome. So we couldn't do a thank you show without Joe of the Shopping Report, which we did earlier in the show. And he didn't even do that as a segment. I just was like, well, everybody likes the Shopping Report, so I'll start reading it once a week. I think he listens to the podcast and knows I do that. I don't know. He might just be in the community and not know I do that. Melissa of Honeybee Kitchen, the Spice Lady, has single-handedly propped up more than one meal here to make sure we're feeding people at events. Toolman Tim had the idea for the Million Satoshi giveaway. And he has been somebody who, so originally I was bigger than he was. And now I'm pretty sure he's bigger than I am. He reached out to me to be on my show. And then the day of the show canceled. And it's because he kind of chickened out. And then a few months later, he admitted he chickened out and asked to be on the show again. I was like, sure, come on the show. And what has happened is we've both been kind of growing like this, where we pass each other. And then we're like, so this is what I learned about social marketing this week. And then we share best practices. He's always been there for me. He always answers my texts when I'm like, I don't know what to do. Brian from Food Forest Farms may start roasting my coffee soon. But he also was the person who came up with the solution for me for which roaster to use, and always cheers me on when I'm trying a new project. So that's been great. Then we have Porterhouse and Teal. Again, another YouTube channel. I'll be on it at 7 tonight, which is in 45 minutes or hour 45 minutes, 1 hour and 45 minutes. I will be on with Porterhouse and Teal. And they're the kind of people who you just want to know. They're nice to the heart and always happy to help another person in our community. And they've done that a lot. Yeah, Porterhouse and Teal, that's their hiker names. And then this is last but not least, John Athide, who you don't know. But if you come to Self-Reliance Festival, you will see him doing a scything demonstration and you will know him. He's very good at marketing. And he's very good at graphic design. And if you've seen the commercial with Joel Salatin about Self-Reliance Festival, he's the one who made that video. But he's always given me ideas for other communities I could reach out to. to grow the podcast. And he and his wife, Whitney, well, I knew Whitney first before I knew John. They're good friends. And I like to have them it's like, I like to know they're on my side. And then this last one is the biggest one, and it's everybody who listens to the podcast and takes a step in their own life to make it better, takes a step to address something that's uncomfortable, takes a step to be kind to somebody who's kind of pissing them off that day, but they're like, I need to remember that they're in a place where I'm not right now. And part of my frustration is that I used to be in that place and they could just leave by walking out of it, right? Every one of you who's given me an email about an idea or a response to something in an episode, every one of you who's sent me something to check out, every one of you who's interacted with each other, without you, this podcast would not exist. And even though you may not get answers to all the emails that come in fact, for a while there, I didn't answer any. I read them. I see them. And I try to build them into the show as much as possible. Sometimes I'll be like, I'm going to answer that on the show, so I'm not going to answer it in emails. Other times I'm like, I'll get back to it, and I don't. Something I've worked on very hard this year is to get more responsive in email because I need to be. And I know that that's my thing to work on. But it's been really great to watch you all grow and to watch you say, screw it. Society's telling me I can't, but I'm going to anyway. And I don't care what society says anymore. I don't care if the economy's hard. I'm going to make this work. I don't care if I am supposed to be locked in debt all the time. I'm going to make this work. I don't care if I accidentally got into a toxic relationship. I'm going to get out. Watching that is why I do this day after day after day. Watching that and seeing you guys grow is probably the best part of podcasting. So thank you to you. And don't forget about the Million Satoshi giveaway, livingfreeintennessee.com. That post is there. Don't forget that we all start somewhere. And the minute that we start indicating that we want to change, if there's somebody there saying, oh, really? How do you think you could change? Sometimes that's all it takes for them to change their life. Actually, it's funny that Tori says this right now. I mentioned that Jenny was instrumental in me leaving a bad marriage. But you, Cole, Jenny told me you were rooting for me behind the scenes. That was very helpful. I was, Tori. I knew it was Jenny. Jenny tells me things. Tori changed her whole life. And she had to take a big risk to do it. And her kids are better off, and she is better off because she was brave. And that's what I love seeing. So thank you guys. We made our 1 million downloads. Let's see how fast we can get to 2 million, okay? With that, go out, make it a great week.